The Indus Valley Civilization. History usually celebrates conquerors, kings, and the empires that left their stories carved in stone. But some of the most haunting chapters belong to the civilizations that slipped away quietly. No final war, no dramatic fall. Just silence. Cities once alive with millions suddenly frozen in time, daring us to explain their disappearance. And one of the greatest mysteries begins in the Indus Valley, stretching across modern-day Pakistan and northwest India. Picture this landscape between 3300 and 1300 BCE. The Harappan people, masters of order, architecture, and engineering, built cities so advanced they feel out of place in the ancient world. Mohenjo-daro. Harappa. Urban centers that may have held 40,000 residents each, bigger than most European towns for thousands of years to come. These weren't clusters of mud houses. They were meticulously designed city grids, aligned with astonishing precision. Wide streets, multi-room homes, and bathrooms, private bathrooms, with toilets linked to an underground sewage system. Long before Rome glorified aqueducts, the Harappans had already mastered sanitation. Their economy thrived on farming and long-distance trade. Harappan seals, tiny carved emblems adorned with animals and mysterious symbols, have been found as far as ancient Mesopotamia. This wasn't an isolated culture. It was a connected one, buzzing with industry, innovation, and creativity. They standardized weights and measures, perfected pottery and metalwork, and developed their own writing system. And that is where the puzzle deepens. The Indus script, more than 400 elegant, unique symbols, has never been decoded. We have thousands of examples, but no bilingual text, no Rosetta Stone, no key. We don't know their myths, their rulers, their beliefs. Even their real name has been lost. Their entire identity is locked away, written in a language we cannot read. Stranger still, for such a massive civilization, there are no towering temples, extravagant palaces, or giant statues. Their cities seem built for practical life, not for glorifying kings or gods. It hints at a society possibly more equal, more community-driven, than any of its contemporaries. But again, without their words, we can only speculate. Then, somewhere around 1900 BC, the silence begins. Streets empty. Trade stalls close. Houses are abandoned, one by one. No fires. No invaders. No smoldering ruins. Just a slow retreat until the great cities stand hollow and lifeless. For years, textbooks blamed an Aryan invasion, northern nomads sweeping through and overthrowing the peaceful Harappans. But the archaeology tells another story. There is no widespread destruction, no heaps of weapons, no burn layers. Even the bodies once thought to mark a massacre in Mohenjo-daro now appear to be victims of disease or social collapse. Instead, the evidence points to something far quieter and far more devastating. The climate changed. The rivers that fed the Indus world, including the Ghaggar Hakra, believed by many to be the legendary Sarasvati, began to dry. Monsoons weakened. The fertile plains turned brittle. What was once a breadbasket became dust. A civilization built on water slowly starved of it. People migrated eastward, abandoning their grand cities for smaller, scattered settlements where survival was still possible. Not a fall, but a fading. A slow unraveling of one of humanity's greatest early societies. And as they walked away, they left us questions carved in symbols no one can read. What happens when a civilization's voice is locked behind an undeciphered script? And what other ancient worlds vanished just as silently? The Maya. When we imagine the Maya, we don't picture a vanished civilization. Their descendants are still very much alive. Millions of people across Mexico and Central America speaking Mayan languages, practicing ancient traditions, and carrying forward a cultural line unbroken for thousands of years. So how can a civilization both endure and disappear? Because it wasn't the Maya who vanished. It was their world. Their classic age, from around 250 to 900 CE, was a golden era unlike anything the Americas had ever seen. Deep in the tropical lowlands of southern Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize, city-states rose like stone giants above the rainforest canopy. These weren't provinces of a single empire, but rival kingdoms, ever shifting in their alliances, their battles, and their quest for divine legitimacy. Tikal, Kalakmul, Karakul, names carved into stone, echoing with the footfalls of priests and kings. They built towering pyramids that pierced the jungle sky. They created the most sophisticated writing system of pre-Columbian America, and they mapped the heavens with a precision that still astonishes scientists today. Their calendars, layered systems of cycles within cycles, could calculate dates millions of years backward or forward. Their measurement of the solar year was accurate to an almost impossible degree. They tracked the movements of Venus to decide when wars should begin. And they independently developed the concept of zero, a mathematical idea so powerful that entire civilizations were built on it. This was a culture obsessed with time, cosmology, and the balance between humans and the divine. Maya kings were not just political leaders. They were shamans, intermediaries, figures whose blood rituals were believed to keep the universe itself aligned. And then, in the southern lowlands, the lights began to fade. In the late 8th century, something shifted. Temple construction slowed, then stopped. Royal inscriptions, the carved histories of dynasties, abruptly went silent. City after city emptied. Populations dropped by as much as 90%. The great plazas and ball courts were abandoned, left to the vines and the creeping jungle. Within a single century, some of the most advanced urban centers on Earth had become ghost cities swallowed by green. What could do this? What could wipe out not just a kingdom, but an entire way of life? Theories abound, and the truth may lie in a combination of catastrophes. For years, many scholars blamed warfare. The late Classic period shows an escalation of conflict. Captured kings humiliated, dynasties crushed, alliances shattered. But war alone doesn't explain such widespread collapse. The most compelling culprit is the sky itself. Sediment cores from lakes and mineral deposits inside caves tell a chilling story. Between 800 and 1000 CE, the Maya region experienced a prolonged, brutal megadrought, one of the worst in thousands of years. Even with their reservoirs and irrigation systems, even with their mastery of water, the rains failed. Year after year, crops withered, famine spread, disease followed, and with every failed harvest, the legitimacy of the kings, those divine intermediaries, crumbled. If the rains didn't come, the gods were not listening. Or worse, the rulers had lost their power. Political chaos erupted. Cities fractured. People fled. A civilization built on cosmic order cracked under the pressure of climate and conflict feeding into one another. But the Maya didn't disappear. They adapted. They left the failing southern lowlands and moved north to the Yucatan, where new centers like Chichen Itza and Mayapan would thrive long after the classic cities fell silent. The people lived on. But the world of the divine kings, the world of towering pyramids and cities aligned with the heavens, was swallowed by the rainforest forever. The Khmer Empire. Deep in the Cambodian jungle, wrapped in vines and mist, stands a place that almost feels impossible. Angkor Wat, an immense stone temple complex covering more than 400 acres. The largest religious monument ever built, carved with miles of intricate bas-reliefs depicting ancient Hindu epics. But Angkor Wat is only the crown jewel. Behind it lies something far greater, the vast and mysterious world of the Khmer Empire. From the 9th to the 15th centuries, this civilization ruled Southeast Asia with an ambition that reshaped the landscape itself. At its height in the 12th century, Angkor, their capital, was not just a city. It was the largest pre-industrial urban center on the planet. While medieval London squeezed 30,000 people into narrow streets, Angkor may have housed nearly 1 million, not in tight blocks, but spread across a sprawling network of temples, palaces, villages, and endless rice fields, all tied together by a man-made water system unlike anything else in the ancient world. The Khmer were masters of hydraulics. They reshaped nature with colossal reservoirs, canals, and engineered lakes known as barays. The West Baray alone stretches over 5 miles long, a human-built sea holding billions of gallons. This wasn't just irrigation, it was cosmic architecture. To the Khmer, these watery vistas symbolized the primordial ocean, while the temples rising from them represented the homes of the gods. At the center of it all stood the Devaraja, the God King, responsible for maintaining harmony between heaven, earth, and water through the empire's massive hydraulic network. For 6 centuries, this system produced agricultural surpluses so vast that the Khmer could harvest rice 3 or even 4 times a year. That wealth fueled temples like Angkor Wat, testaments to a society of engineers, builders, artists, and astronomers. But by the early 1400s, the rhythm faltered. Inscriptions stop, construction ceases, and the once vibrant historical record falls eerily silent. In 1431, the neighboring kingdom of Ayutthaya swept in and sacked Angkor. For generations, this was seen as the empire's downfall. But the truth is darker. By the time the invaders arrived, Angkor was already in a deep, irreversible decline. They didn't destroy a thriving empire, they finished off a dying one. So what really happened? The answer begins with the very system that made Angkor great. Modern LiDAR scans, technology that reveals ruins beneath the jungle floor, have shown that Angkor was far larger and more complex than we ever imagined. But that scale came at a cost. To build it, the Khmer cleared immense forests, stripping away the natural protection that anchored the soil. When the rains came, erosion filled their canals with silt. Reservoirs clogged. The once perfect hydraulic machine began to break down. And then came the climate shift. Sediment cores show that between the 14th and 15th centuries, Southeast Asia endured brutal multi-decade droughts, followed by catastrophic floods. A fragile, damaged water system couldn't adapt. Some years brought too little water, others brought far too much. Rice fields failed. Reservoirs burst. The agricultural foundation of the empire collapsed. And on top of this, the kingdom experienced a spiritual transformation. The shift from Hinduism to Theravada Buddhism undermined the entire idea of divine kingship. The monumental labor needed to maintain Angkor's water network no longer had a spiritual justification. Why build temples for gods you no longer believed required them? Facing climate chaos, failing infrastructure, and a crisis of ideology, the Khmer did the one thing that made sense. They walked away. The capital shifted south, closer to modern Phnom Penh, where the land was fertile and trade more reliable. Angkor, once the greatest metropolis on earth, was left to the jungle. Its stone towers, once symbols of divine power, now stand in quiet ruins, swallowed by roots and shadows. The ancestral Puebloans, Anasazi. In the vast sandstone landscapes of the American Southwest, carved into cliffs glowing red under the setting sun, lie some of the most haunting ruins on the continent. These are the homes of the ancestral Puebloans, a civilization that thrived for more than 1,000 years, from around the dawn of the Common Era to 1300 CE. The term Anasazi, once commonly used, comes from a Navajo word often interpreted as ancient enemies. And today, the descendants of this culture, the Pueblo peoples of Arizona and New Mexico, prefer the name Ancestral Puebloans. But whatever name we use, their disappearance remains one of North America's greatest enigmas. For centuries, they were masters of survival in a harsh, unforgiving desert. They coaxed maize, beans, and squash from land where rain was a rare blessing. And they were extraordinary builders. Early on, they lived in pit houses, simple, circular dwellings dug into the earth. But over time, their architecture evolved into something spectacular. Their great houses, vast multi-story stone complexes, rose like fortresses from the canyon floors. The most iconic of them all is Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Shaped like a giant D, it once stood 4 stories tall, contained over 600 rooms, and remained the largest residential building in North America until the age of skyscrapers. Chaco Canyon wasn't just a settlement. It was the heart of a continental network. Straight, engineered roads stretched for hundreds of miles, connecting distant communities across the desert like spokes on a cosmic wheel. But their most awe-inspiring creations came later. In the 1200s, thousands of ancestral Puebloans moved upward, literally, into the cliffs. They built entire villages in sheltered alcoves high above the canyon floors. Places like Cliff Palace in Mesa Verde, Colorado, hidden, elevated, and accessible only by narrow hand-and-toe trails carved into the stone. Why move into the cliffs? Why suddenly build homes in locations so difficult to reach? Defense seems the obvious answer. These cliff dwellings are natural fortresses, nearly impossible to attack. Archaeological evidence, burned structures, shattered tools, and skeletons bearing signs of violence suggest that this was indeed a turbulent, dangerous time. But the bigger mystery is what happened after. Because after investing generations of effort into these astonishing cliffside cities, the people walked away. Around 1300 CE, the entire Four Corners region, where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet, was abandoned. Tens of thousands of people left behind homes, pottery, tools, even stores of food. They didn't trickle out. They moved all at once. One of the largest migrations in North American prehistory, and for centuries, no one knew why. The answer, it turns out, was hidden in wood. By studying the growth rings of ancient beams used in their dwellings, scientists reconstructed the climate with remarkable accuracy. And what the trees revealed was devastating. From 1276 to 1299, the Southwest endured the Great Drought, 23 consecutive years of withering dryness. Almost a quarter century without reliable rain. For people who depended entirely on agriculture in a land already strained for water, this was nothing short of an apocalypse. Crops died, springs evaporated, animals vanished, and the social tensions already threatening the region, fears of raids, shrinking resources, political stress, erupted into crisis. Their religious leaders, whose rituals were believed to summon rain, might have been viewed as having lost the favor of the gods. Their political structure faltered. Their communities splintered. In the end, they didn't collapse. They relocated. Over a few generations, the ancestral Puebloans moved south and east toward more stable water sources like the Rio Grande Valley. There, they merged with existing communities, eventually forming the modern Pueblo tribes, Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, Taos, and others. Their oral traditions still speak of a long migration from the north. The cliff dwellings weren't abandoned because of some mysterious vanishing. They were left behind because the environment made survival impossible. A stark reminder that even the most resilient cultures remain tied to the rhythms of climate and the whims of the land. The Olmec. In the lush, humid lowlands of south-central Mexico, a culture emerged around 1500 BCE that would shape nearly every major civilization that followed: the Maya, the Aztec, and countless others. We know them today as the Olmec, a name borrowed from the Aztecs meaning rubber people, a nod to the latex-bearing trees of their homeland. But their true legacy runs far deeper. The Olmec were Mesoamerica's cultura madre, the mother culture, pioneers of monumental architecture, ritual ball games, and possibly even one of the region's earliest writing systems. They are best remembered for their breathtaking artistic triumphs, the colossal heads. These enormous basalt portraits, some towering 11 feet high and weighing up to 50 tons, depict powerful rulers with strikingly individualized features. What makes them even more extraordinary is the journey they underwent. The stone was quarried more than 100 miles from the heartland, and with no wheels or draft animals, the Olmec somehow hauled these titanic boulders through dense jungle, across rivers, and into ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta. Their organization, skill, and ritual devotion must have been immense. Olmec cities aligned with celestial patterns. Their carvings brimmed with mythic creatures, jaguar-human hybrids, supernatural beings, and symbols hinting at a complex, shamanistic worldview. For nearly a millennium, they laid the foundation for the religions, political systems, and artistic styles that would define Mesoamerica. And then, they began to fade. By 400 BCE, La Venta was abandoned. Colossal heads were deliberately toppled and buried. The distinctive Olmec style dissolved. But this wasn't a dramatic or sudden collapse. No massive drought, no invading armies. Their disappearance was quieter, stranger, more like a culture slowly dissolving into the societies around it. What forced this change? Some point to their fragile environment. Their world depended on rivers that could silt up, shift, or vanish due to tectonic activity. Volcanic eruptions may have blanketed farmland with ash. Any of these disruptions could have pushed communities to relocate. Others see the seeds of decline within their own society. Building massive ceremonial centers and transporting colossal heads required extreme control over labor and resources. That level of hierarchy can strain a population. The buried heads, once thought to be smashed by invaders, may instead reflect internal rebellion, ritual closure, or the symbolic end of a ruler's reign. But perhaps the most compelling explanation is that the Olmec didn't disappear at all, they transformed. Their ideas, technologies, and people spread outward. Their influence merged with rising cultures like the Zapotec and early Maya. Over centuries, the Olmec identity blurred, absorbed into the civilizations they had inspired. The mother culture did not die. She simply stepped back into the shadows, her face indistinguishable yet unmistakably present in every culture that came after. The Minoans. On the sunlit island of Crete, a civilization rose during the Bronze Age that seemed almost dreamlike compared to the war-torn cultures around it. These were the Minoans, named much later after the legendary King Minos, ruler of the mythical labyrinth. From about 2700 to 1450 BCE, they dominated the Aegean Sea as a wealthy, artistic, and remarkably peaceful maritime power. Their world revolved around sprawling palace complexes, intricate, multi-story labyrinths filled with workshops, storerooms, living quarters, and ceremonial spaces. The greatest of these was Knossos, a vast palace built around a massive central courtyard. Its walls were alive with color, frescoes of dolphins drifting through turquoise seas, dancers in vibrant robes, and scenes of the mysterious ritual that defined Minoan culture, bull leaping, where youths vaulted gracefully over charging bulls. Unlike most ancient civilizations, the Minoans built no defensive walls. Their protection was their fleet, a navy so dominant that they trusted the open sea more than fortresses. Their trade networks stretched across the Mediterranean, linking Crete to Egypt, the Levant, and mainland Greece. They even developed their own writing system, Linear A, still undeciphered, its language sealed behind symbols we can understand only as numbers and records. Their art reveals something else extraordinary. Women appear everywhere as priestesses, leaders, and goddesses. Minoan society may have been one of the few Bronze Age cultures where women held genuine public and religious power. Then, around 1450 BCE, almost everything burned. Nearly every major palace and town on Crete was destroyed in a wave of fire and collapse. For centuries, scholars searched for the culprit behind the fall of this peaceful empire. The first suspect was nature itself. North of Crete lay the island of Thera, modern Santorini. In the 17th or 16th century BCE, its volcano erupted with a force so immense it tore the island apart. Billions of tons of ash darkened the skies. Tsunamis thundered across the Aegean. For a long time, this cataclysm was believed to be the death blow that wiped out the Minoans. But the timeline refused to cooperate. Archaeology has shown that the final destruction of the Minoan palaces happened many decades, possibly a century, after the Thera eruption. The eruption destabilized their economy and weakened their power, but it didn't finish them. Something else did. The Mycenaeans, rising on the Greek mainland, were everything the Minoans were not: warlike, expansionist, and armed. These were the people of the Trojan War, the world of Agamemnon and Achilles. They borrowed Minoan trade routes, Minoan art, even the Minoan script. In fact, they adapted Linear A into Linear B, the earliest form of written Greek. Archaeology now reveals a clearer story. Weakened by generations of economic strain after the eruption, the Minoans became vulnerable. The Mycenaeans seized their moment. They invaded Crete, destroyed the palaces, and rebuilt Knossos in their own style. Linear A vanished, replaced by Linear B. Minoan art shifted, becoming more rigid, more martial, more Mycenaean. The Minoans did not disappear in a volcanic firestorm. They were absorbed, folded into the culture of their more aggressive neighbors. Their world of frescoes, open courtyards, bull vaulting, and unwalled palaces faded into memory, leaving behind only quiet ruins and an undeciphered script whispering the final secrets of a civilization swallowed by time. The Nabateans. Deep in the Jordanian desert, where wind-sculpted cliffs glow red beneath the rising sun, an impossible city emerges from the rock. Petra, the rose-red city, half as old as time, seems less built than revealed, as if ancient hands carved an entire metropolis out of living stone. Its most iconic facade, the treasury, stands like a monument to a forgotten world. But it's only one among thousands: tombs, temples, halls, and stairways chiseled into sheer canyon walls. This was the stronghold of the Nabateans, an elusive, ingenious Arab people who turned a barren desert gorge into the beating heart of international trade. The Nabateans began as wandering nomads, but sometime in the 4th century BCE, they settled in this hidden canyon, perfectly positioned at the crossroads of the great caravan routes. Spices, incense, perfumes, luxuries from the Arabian Peninsula traveled north through Petra on their journey toward the Mediterranean and beyond. The Nabateans controlled the roads, taxed the caravans, and guarded the traders who passed through. And with each passing year, their wealth grew. Yet wealth alone couldn't keep a desert city alive. Water was the true treasure, and here the Nabateans showed their genius. They engineered an astonishing network of channels, dams, reservoirs, and carved cisterns that captured every precious trickle of rain. With this system, they sustained gardens, workshops, and a bustling urban population in one of the driest regions on Earth. From the 3rd century BCE to the 2nd century CE, Petra thrived as a cosmopolitan hub, a blend of Nabatean artistry with Hellenistic, Egyptian, and Roman influences. Their script, a form of Aramaic, would eventually evolve into the Arabic alphabet used today. And yet, for all their achievements, the people themselves remained strangely hidden. Almost none of their written records survive. Most were likely ink on papyrus, fragile, easily lost to time. What we're left with is a city of tombs, where stone monuments speak louder than vanished manuscripts. The decline of the Nabateans came not with fire or invasion, but with the slow turning of history. In 106 CE, Rome officially annexed the Nabatean kingdom, turning it into the province of Arabia Petrea. At first, Petra continued to prosper, but global trade was shifting. The Romans began favoring faster sea routes over long desert caravans. Wealth flowed to coastal ports instead of Petra's winding mountain passes. Then competition arrived. Palmyra, rising in Syria, became a new center of desert commerce. Caravans that once passed through Petra now chose easier roads and richer markets. And the desert city suffered another blow. In 363 CE, a massive earthquake tore through the region, destroying temples, homes, and, fatally, its water system. The Nabateans rebuilt what they could, but the city was badly weakened. By the 7th century, the rise of Islam redirected the remaining trade routes. Petra's lifelines were severed. One by one, its streets emptied. Its carved facades fell silent. Eventually, Petra became a ghost city, remembered only by the Bedouin tribes who guarded its secrets. To the Western world, it vanished entirely. Until 1812, when a Swiss explorer disguised as an Arab scholar tricked his way through the guarded canyon entrance and revealed Petra's wonders once again. The Nabateans didn't disappear overnight. They were undone by the ancient version of globalization. Their desert empire thrived only as long as the world's wealth moved through their canyon. Once new powers and new technologies, better ships, shifting borders, redirected the flow of commerce, Petra's purpose evaporated. What remains is a silent kingdom carved in stone, a reminder that even the most ingenious societies can be abandoned when the world changes around them. The Aksumite Empire. While Rome stood at the height of its power, another great empire, equally formidable in its influence, was rising in the mountainous highlands of what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea. This was the kingdom of Aksum, one of the 4 great powers of the ancient world, mentioned alongside Rome, Persia, and China by contemporary historians. From the 1st to the 7th century CE, Aksum was a world-class trading empire, commanding the crucial sea lanes of the Red Sea. This strategic position allowed it to link the Roman Mediterranean with India and the Far East, forming a vital artery of global commerce long before the term globalization existed. The Aksumites were expert merchants. Ivory, gold, emeralds, frankincense, exotic animals. Aksum exported prestige itself. Their capital, Aksum, was a thriving metropolis, and their chief port, Adulis, was one of the most cosmopolitan harbors of the ancient world. Their economic confidence was so great that they minted their own coins in gold, silver, and bronze, the only sub-Saharan African civilization of antiquity known to do so. But their architectural achievements were even more awe-inspiring. The Axumites carved colossal stelae, massive obelisks of granite, each cut from a single enormous block. The largest of these, the Great Stele, once stood over 100 feet tall and weighed more than 500 tons. These structures were likely grave markers for their kings, silent skyscrapers honoring rulers whose names have faded from memory. In the 4th century, during the reign of King Ezana, Aksum underwent a dramatic transformation. It became one of the world's first Christian empires. This move aligned Aksum with the Christian Byzantine Empire and established a religious identity that endures in Ethiopia to this day. Aksumite culture blended African traditions with Arabian and Greco-Roman influences, creating a civilization that stood at the crossroads of continents, languages, and faiths. So what happened to this powerful empire? Much like the Nabateans, Aksum's decline was a slow suffocation, not a sudden collapse. The first major blow came in the 6th century when the Sasanian Persians seized control of parts of southern Arabia. This disrupted Aksum's dominance over Red Sea trade. But the true turning point was the rise of Islam in the 7th century. As Muslim armies rapidly expanded across the Middle East and North Africa, they gained control of the Red Sea, Aksum's commercial lifeline. Suddenly, Aksum's access to international trade evaporated, cut off from its Christian ally Byzantium. Surrounded by rising Islamic powers and blocked from the coast, Aksum was forced to retreat inland. The empire shifted from international trade to isolated subsistence. Climate change dealt another devastating blow. Lake sediment studies from the Ethiopian highlands show that this isolation coincided with a transition to a much drier climate. Agriculture failed, soils degraded, and famine likely followed. The empire, once rich, outward-looking, and globally connected, fractured. Cities shrank. Trade networks disintegrated. By the early Middle Ages, Aksum had faded from the world stage, its grandeur reduced to legend. Yet Aksum did not vanish. Its legacy is profound. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, one of the world's oldest Christian traditions, descends directly from the Aksumite conversion under Ezana. The ancient liturgical language, Guizi, is still used in religious services. The people and their culture survived, resilient, transformed, but continuous. What disappeared was the empire, the gold minting, stele raising, sea-ruling superpower whose ships once sailed alongside those of Rome. Today, its obelisks and inscriptions stand as reminders of a civilization that once commanded the crossroads of the world, and then, quietly, slipped into the highland mists. The Kukutini Tripilia culture. Long before the pyramids pierced the sky, before the first cities of Mesopotamia rose from the dust, a civilization of extraordinary scale thrived in the fertile plains of Eastern Europe, modern-day Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine. This was the Kukutini Tripilia culture, a Neolithic society that endured for over 2 millennia, from roughly 5,500 to 2,750 BCE. These were not mere hunter-gatherers. They built settlements so vast they rivaled anything else in the world at the time. Some of their proto-cities stretched for hundreds of acres and may have housed up to 15,000 people. The towns were carefully planned, with thousands of 2-story homes arranged in concentric rings around a central communal building. They farmed with skill, crafted intricate pottery, and organized society with remarkable sophistication for the Stone Age. But the most astonishing thing about the Kukutini Tripilia people wasn't what they built, it was what they did with it. Every 60 to 80 years, they would deliberately burn their entire settlement to the ground. Not in chaos or war, but as a controlled, ritualized act. Valuables were removed, pottery smashed, and the wooden and clay structures set aflame in a ceremonial conflagration. Then, a new town would rise atop the ashes of the old. Why would a society invest generations into constructing such enormous communities only to destroy them repeatedly? Archaeologists are still puzzled. Some suggest ritual cleansing, marking the end of a cycle or a generational transition. Others propose a symbolic rebirth, a sacred offering to the gods. Practical explanations exist too, decades of wooden homes could become infested or diseased, and burning them was the most effective way to sanitize the settlement. Whatever the reason, this practice reveals a worldview that feels utterly alien to our own. And then, just as mysteriously, it stops. Around 2750 BCE, after thousands of years of building, burning, and rebuilding, the great settlements were abandoned for good. The iconic Cucutini Tripilia pottery vanished from the archaeological record, leaving no trace of the vibrant society that created it. What ended this ancient culture? One likely culprit is climate change. Europe became colder and drier, making large-scale farming increasingly unsustainable. The enormous proto-cities that had been the heart of their civilization could no longer support so many people. Another theory points to human forces, the expansion of the Yamna culture from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. These nomadic, horse-riding, wagon-driving people, the Proto-Indo-Europeans, brought new technologies, mobility, and martial skill. Genetic evidence shows a massive influx of steppe DNA into Europe at this time, suggesting that the Cucutini Tripilia may have been absorbed, displaced, or overwhelmed by these newcomers. The truth may lie in a combination of both. Environmental stress weakening a society already facing the arrival of a powerful, mobile culture. And so, the people who once ritually burned their cities into ashes finally faded from history, leaving only ruins, pottery fragments, and the enduring mystery of a civilization that lived, flourished, and disappeared on its own extraordinary terms. The Rapa Nui. On one of the most remote inhabited islands on Earth, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, a remarkable Polynesian culture achieved feats that still baffle historians today. Over 2,000 miles from the nearest continent, they carved nearly 1,000 giant statues known as moai. Monolithic heads standing up to 33 feet tall and weighing more than 80 tons. Carved from volcanic rock, these statues were then transported miles across rugged terrain and erected on stone platforms called ahu. These incredible monuments are believed to represent deified ancestors, watching over their descendants. When Polynesians first settled Rapa Nui around 1200 CE, the island was lush and covered in dense palm forests. The society they built was complex, organized into clans that competed to honor their ancestors by carving ever larger moai, a competition that fueled their astonishing artistic and engineering achievements. By the time Europeans arrived in 1722, the island was almost unrecognizable. Forests were gone, the population had drastically declined, and the society that created the moai had collapsed. For decades, scholars blamed this collapse on ecological disaster, an idea popularized by Jared Diamond. The story went that the islanders had overcut the forests to move the moai, causing soil erosion, water shortages, and eventual famine and conflict. Recent research, however, paints a more complex picture. While deforestation did occur, the palm trees were also a favorite food of Polynesian rats, which arrived with the first settlers. These rats likely prevented forest regeneration. Moreover, the Rapa Nui people were resourceful, developing advanced rock gardening techniques to enrich poor volcanic soil, allowing them to survive for centuries despite environmental pressures. The final collapse may have had far less to do with self-inflicted ecocide and much more to do with outside forces. European contact brought diseases to which the Rapa Nui had no immunity, and in the 19th century, Peruvian slave raids removed a large portion of the population, including elders who held vital ritual and historical knowledge. By the 1870s, fewer than 150 Rapa Nui remained. The moai stand today not only as monuments to a lost civilization, but as witnesses to human ingenuity, resilience, and tragedy. Their story is a reminder that even the most isolated societies are vulnerable to forces beyond their control, yet capable of extraordinary adaptation. If you're fascinated by the secrets of lost civilizations and the mysteries of human history, subscribe to Strange Wise and join us as we uncover the hidden stories of our past.